Hi, my name's Rod Banner and I'm here with a very illustrious panel, and we're going to talk about the future of customer experience. I've got some extraordinary skills here amongst us, but I feel I'm going to pick immediately on somebody who knows something because his day job brings him into contact with customers. That's Justin, who's got a lot to say about TSB. And I don't know about you, but I've had a lot of customer experience nightmares, many of which have been in banks. So maybe we could just set the scene. What is customer experience and how do you think it fits into the banking world, Justin?
Well, I think it's a lot of different things. When you think about how it's going digital, how branch has been the human touch point in the past, telephony, there's a lot of different experiences for customers to engage with a bank through. That's obviously changing a lot. The way that the apps deliver banking today, people expect more and more, want it to be faster, quicker, easier. Technology doesn't always keep up with that. Sometimes there are outages. We know to our cost and detriment as a brand. Last year was not great for us when we migrated our systems. So yeah, it is changing. Branches are becoming fewer and fewer all the time, and people do love that human touch. So the challenge for us going forward would be bringing those things together. How can we do digital that is easier, faster and better for people, but still have that human touch about it?
Well, I guess Mark is fortunately right at your hand here, and probably that's what you've been doing for some time. Tell us about how digitization is at least picking up the mantle.
I think, particularly in the financial industry, the reduction in human contact is an inevitability, I suppose. Reduced number of branches, and there is one might argue a paper-thin difference between some of the services offered between banks, because we all borrow money on a credit rating basis. So service is the differentiator, but if there are fewer people, how do you do that? And it's clear to me that you need to use humans where humans are required, and then machines when humans are not available or where they are unnecessary. And so this trade-off between, I'm a biologist by background, so pretentiously I often say that I sit somewhere between the carbon and the silicon, and choosing which is best is an art rather than a science. There's not much evidence for that. You take the example of, for instance, a millennial. The expectation is that younger people want to have digital experiences exclusively. It's not the case for large debt decisions, mortgage decisions, for instance, in which case they want to speak to a human being in a branch. However, everything post that meeting could easily be automated. The requirement for pay slips or identification, whatever else it may be, that can all be done by machines. And machines never sleep, and if they are human-like in the way they engage, if they learn and get smarter through machine learning, then you can have a rather elegant pass-off between the carbon and the silicon and perhaps back again.
It's interesting, young millennials and those sort of decisions that you talk about, I think you're absolutely right. They want to see the whites of the eyes of somebody when they've got such a crucial decision that could be lifelong, about mortgage or something like that. And yet nobody really wants to have to travel down to their high street or something to make, have an appointment to go and visit somebody. And so the future of those sorts of encounters might be virtual through an iPad, it might be a virtual meeting, but with a human.
Yes.
But you then again don't need the footprint in the estate of branches if that can work as well as it should do.
See,
Yeah.
I'd like to just, before you respond, Elizabeth, I'd just like to say what you could do always seems to me to be driven by cost reduction. I mean, there's nothing wrong with human engagement, and there's nothing wrong with many of the services which we have had in banks being delivered by people, but we've cost reduced them out of the equation to some extent. And I'm thinking only just for a moment, the difference between the types of banking services, and this isn't obviously purely confined to banking, but you're an advisor to Smith & Williamson, which is obviously a banking service for high net worth, where there are beautiful oil paintings hanging on every boardroom meeting.
A dining room.
It's a completely different experience.
Yeah.
So is it fair to say that customer experience that's being driven online is largely being driven online from cost reduction as opposed to the beautiful process?
I think broadband and mobile connectivity has has just raised the stakes across the board, whether you're talking about getting a home or auto policy from Hastings, or having your wealth managed by Smith & Williamson, or getting a Barclay card and using it on a bus or a tube. And I think people now have expectations from their financial services providers that are, firstly, across channels. So they have an expectation that they'll be able to interact with the brand in any channel, always on, as needed. They have an expectation that those experiences are going to be consistent, that if I talked to you in the branch, the following day, if I interact with you online, that the information you told me in the branch is going to be visible online. They have an expectation that there will be sort of infinite level of perfect communication inside the bank about me and my relationship. And so I think the challenge is that while there have been cost reductions achieved through all of this, there's also a huge amount of investment that goes into making all those experiences consistent and ideally differentiated. So you don't necessarily see over time big, costs kind of flowing out of this stuff. Some of it actually results in having to have more channels, more touch points, and more of all of the stuff that we need in terms of technology to do a good job of it. So it's a kind of it's a trade-off, but consumers, just the expectation of what it's going to feel like is now being set by other digital brands, whether it's Amazon or Uber or Airbnb. The bank's digital experience has to be comparable to that in terms of ease.
Absolutely. And I see Mark nodding energetically there because he's delivering some of this. So would you like to respond?
Yeah, I think it's there isn't necessarily a trade-off between communication with humans and communication with machines, as long as that communication results in happier customers. So I'll tell you a project that we're working on at the moment, which is fascinating, and it was around a failed loans journey. And there were too few people in the call centre and too many people that failed a loan application process, 90%. So this isn't a credit issue, this is a process issue. Now what was happening before automation was introduced was between 5 and 7 days after the loans journey had failed, a human being was calling the customer saying, "Can I help?" Now if you think about that in a retail perspective, this is sort of equivalent to going around a car showroom that's empty and a week later someone tapping on the shoulder and saying, "Can I help?" Of course you can't help. This is appalling customer service. It's better that you didn't ring, is what actually happened.
Yeah, leave me alone.
Now, if a machine intervened, because the modelling or the data or the evidence shows you that if you contact someone at this moment in time with this message and broker an exchange between the human being at a later date, it's the same sort of thing, but it looks like you've cared, then customer experience is much better, the agent experience is much better, and the machine has solved a communication problem. So communication, as long as it's better, automation can deliver that, and everyone's happy as a consequence.
So as a marketer, I suppose I've witnessed the change from push marketing towards pull marketing, and now the general consensus is that content and people creating content through different customer journeys and touch points that's relevant and useful is a way forward. In terms of the type of customer experiences that we see in the future, do you see brands becoming either more prevalent in people's consideration set, or perhaps almost moving backward to the point where they just get discovered at the point of interest? If I'm interested in a loan, I sort of can discover the party that's somehow lodged in my mind that I can relate to as the purveyor of loans. Do you see that happening more or less? Do you see search becoming more or less crucial over time?
I think brands, I think there's been a resurgence in the importance of brand. I think that certain categories like insurance and others have had a sort of race to the bottom in terms of commoditizing the product area, because
price comparison
sites,
websites,
just do that for you. And they're fundamentally flawed because there are differences between those products. You'd say it's fundamentally the same thing, it's just an API that's different. But actually there's usually whistles and bells and bits around the product that are different by each brand. So I'm not going to say that comparison sites are an evil, but I think we've all woken up to the fact that the brand is important, and when you look at how people use those comparison sites, they don't just go for the cheapest. They peg down to the third or fourth, and now I recognise that brand, I'll go with that. But that's not the only reason I think that brands will resurge, or there'll be the content piece that you talk around making the difference. When it comes to digitized processes and in-app, most brands have gone through the straight-through processing kind of conversion, where they've transformed their processor to make an app, not 20 questions, but 3. They've made it so that, well, how much quicker can the click go and get something done or through? It can't get faster, it can't get much better. It's about the service layers you put around the experience. It's about the brand, it's about the engagement that you can give, because it won't get faster, quicker, or anything like that more than it already has. It's what can you do on top of that people go, gee, that was good, I like that. I only went in to get this, but I got that as well. And I think that's where brands will make quite a difference in differentiating in the future, because otherwise they'll be the
I'll
same.
use a term that's your brand's term, which is helpful banking, right? Where I think people now appreciate speed, and they appreciate the frictionlessness of 3 clicks and I'm done, but they are willing to stay longer if you're doing something for them that's helpful, and you're doing something that feels linked to and valuable relative to the experience I'm meant to be having when I'm managing my financial life. And so you do see that if you look on any of the online banking apps you have today, they're building in additional, they stripped them all back so that they were kind of next to nothing. And now they're beginning to build in additional, whether it's features or kinds of information or offers or helpful hints and tips about managing your money. I think they're trying to now be more than just in, out, done, simple. They're trying to be more a place where people manage their financial lives. And there are different segments of consumers who want to be educated, right? So at Provident, we serve a customer who's trying to get on the financial ladder in various ways, whether it's with a high rate credit card or a car loan, whatever it might be, and they need to be educated about their financial affairs, and they're really happy to have a brand do that for them. So I think you have to look at this whole thing through the lens of which customer you're serving, and what do they need. Absolutely.
So I think we just touched on when you were talking a little bit about how brands are playing an increasingly important role. I think it's largely connected with trust in a world where many of the providers in pretty much every sector are probably trusted less than before. Trust is going to be more and more crucial, and many of the services which we're talking about, which are far more personalized, are going to be reliant on personal data. Trust and data are two things which are currently in some degree of discord right now. Do you see us being more likely to engage with a trusted brand and hand over more of that data if we get something back?
Increasingly, is all I'll say. I mean, there is that tension, you're absolutely right, but if you go back 10 years ago, that tension was even greater. And I think that the trade-off between, all right, this is transactional, if I release, give a bit more of this, then I will get more relevant offers and treatment or experience going forward. That's a trade-off that I'm perhaps more comfortable with doing. And when you look at upon a time continuum, as I said, 10 years ago, it's very different from where people are today. But also if you look at it in terms of, dare I say, age and demographic, some people are less comfortable with that, whereas some, should we say, millennials and others are probably far more into that transaction. Okay, I'll do this if I get that. And as we go forward in time, I think increasingly people will be more comfortable with that exchange.
I think they're cognizant of the value of their data, and they're aware of their data and what's being shared and what's not being shared in significantly, greater range of different areas of their lives. But there is definitely lots and lots of evidence of people willing to enter into the trade and people willing to say, and actually financial institutions are trusted to hold data almost more than any other other provider that we might look at. And so banks and insurance companies lost popularity, but they never entirely lost trust in the last decade. They've held on to the perception of being able to manage your data better than the phone company, better than the doctor's office, and certainly better than Facebook.
Yeah, so following on, do you suppose that banks or other institutions will be able to offer monetary inducements for people to impart more data? It's a bit like actually producing vehicles for intent data.
Yeah. So today there are effectively data exchanges going on all the time between me being willing to share a little bit of data in order to get something back, and that behavior is being developed as we speak. And there are lots and lots of little tech companies that are looking at that personal data space.
But this is melding data on behalf of a brand rather out from an individual perspective, isn't it?
So it's what I would say is there's a lot of little companies coming into the space where they're saying we will provide a service for you to securely and safely share data with whether it's a healthcare provider or a pharma company or a bank or whatever it might be. But you, the individual, you, the consumer, own and control how and where that data is going to go. There are a number of services like that being built and developed. I think it'll be interesting to see whether any of them gets to critical mass. Because until you really have, the data of millions of consumers, you're not that relevant to anybody who wants to buy it. So the whole issue here, I think, is going to be one of network effects and whether anybody can get to the place where they really own the data of all consumers in the way that, Axiom or some of the other data providers have in the past.
So we've talked a lot about the customer experience inside the financial services sector, largely because this panel is comprised of people who operate inside the financial services sector. But I think customer experience, as you pointed out before, will be measured on customer experiences in other sectors.
Absolutely.
Who do you suppose is doing the best job of crafting the future of customer experiences outside finance, and why?
A brand I love is Ocado. I think Ocado has been around now for probably at least a decade, and continues to innovate and both anticipate but also meet my expectations in terms of range, price, but also timeliness of delivery. And if they are about to not be on time, I know about it. If they're, so they engage with their customers in a way that I think is really quite impressive, and have very, very few kind of service breakdowns, I guess. And so I love Ocado and think that it really stands out as a brand that sets the bar for, a good overall experience leading to a good relationship.
Let's just drill into that for a moment, because you've mentioned timeliness, you've mentioned the fact, I assume that they've grasped the problem that you as a consumer are suffering and how to fix it. Do you think that's the criteria?
Well, what I think they know is that you've organized your day around a certain expectation that you're going to get this delivery at this time with this stuff in it, and that a breakdown or a disappointment on any of those dimensions is going to be a material fail relative to my busy day and what I'm trying to do and why I'm happy to spend a little bit more money to use Ocado. So my sense is that they do design their experience around some very thoughtful customer touch points that they know are the most important, kind of the moments of truth, if you will.
So for those people who don't understand, Ocado is a food delivery
grocery delivery service.
And obviously Justin was nodding, so there's general support for this as being a great customer experience. But of course, many people, particularly in food retail, would say, but that's a terrible food retail experience because you're not sampling, smelling, touching, interacting with the food products. You're just ordering them online.
Yeah.
Is it going to be experiential retail, or is it going to be, pensioned off in the future? He's closing branches,
Yeah, I think when I want to interact with food, I'm likely to be doing that in a restaurant. So for functional, just staples at home, this is the thing I want. And I think the point you're probably making is that people want different things at different times for different reasons, right? And so there's some days when I have the time to go and smell the fruit and make sure that what I'm getting is exactly the right cut of meat. But most of the time, I just want it to be simple and easy.
And we're time starved, aren't we? So most of the time, it's the route that get you what you want, quickest and easiest. American Express running their Shop Local campaign at the moment, which I think is a fantastic idea. But what sort of renaissance do I think there will be for those occasional weekends when you want to browse the shops. Otherwise, they will disappear out completely in the way that you highlight with branches. But Yeah, I was going to say Amazon's another great one for understanding what you like, offering. You chose these books before. That's where they started. Remember, how about these titles? I get proposals about other products that I might like to sample as well. But the whole journey from click to its arrival is communicated, so I know when it's coming, when it's out for delivery, 2 stops away, all that sort of stuff, which is managing expectations beautifully.
Although when you order a book on knitting for your gran and then it says other people that bought this, it doesn't work so well. I think I don't work much in the financial service industry. I mostly work in the telco space with some of the largest players in the world in that area. And I think what's interesting about that is the amount of data that they know and they hold. So they know how many devices are in a home, they know the performance of the devices, they know where people are, and they use that as triggers for communication. And communication at its best is the communication that happens a fraction before you need to know it, to stop you having to call a call centre or stop you having to go and use a chatbot.
Your data's almost out, that kind of stuff.
Your data's almost out, or you keep on rebooting the modem. Maybe there's a problem, or you're not using remote control in the way that we expected. Maybe there's a problem. And it's all about data. It's all about insights into that data, the sort of work that happens in banks. Although telcos are more advanced because they have a simpler challenge, I suspect. More data probably, but a simpler challenge because there are relatively few products. And then if you communicate with people proactively to stop them having to do the reactive communication, which is always uncomfortable for busy people, then they're the leaders in this.
And location data, I think, is really critical.
Yeah, they're really good.
Yeah.
They're really good.
So we've talked about the kind of customer experiences that leads people to stay as a customer and obviously extend customer lifetime values. What do you think, from a customer experience perspective, could change someone's customer behavior? How do you win new customers in a world where everyone's doing a great job? Or will we see increasingly more and more brands retaining their customers over time?
I think the things that will cause customers to cause you to lose customers have to do with really bad service experiences when something goes really, really wrong. So, for example, a claims in a car insurance context, having a claims experience that's terrible is the thing that will drive a customer away. Interestingly, though, many of those kind of terrible moments are also an opportunity for a brand to really differentiate. And so being able to have a what would otherwise be a bad experience, like a car accident, but where the claims experience is actually really good, that's a customer for life. So it's one of those moments where it can go really badly wrong or actually win the business and my loyalty forever. I think the thing that people are very focused on today is fairness and transparency. And if a person feels that the brand is not being truthful or fair, or they're getting a price that doesn't feel right relative to their loyalty or their cost to serve, that's also where you see people feeling like they've got a broken relationship and going away.
Now, you mentioned loyalty, and this is something that I really want to dig into a bit more deeply, because loyalty to me seems like an area where there's not enough focus. If you're a frequent flyer, or if you stay in hotels, the loyalty programs that pervade those industries are, in my personal perspective, not really serving the needs of the customer terribly well. They feel like they're not really working in my favor, they're much more working in the favor of the companies. Have you any loyalty program experience that you can rate? And do you think that loyalty programs could be improved? If you're always buying from Ocado, what do you get for doing that, for example?
You guys may have perspective. I've been in the loyalty space my whole career because my first client when I was at McKinsey was American Express, who sort of pioneered the idea of membership has its rewards, right? It was the brand strapline for decades. And I mean, I think the thing is that in the financial services space, loyalty has become about rewards, cash back, something that's very transactional. I think the thing that has been lost is the sense of specialness and the sense of you know me and you value me and you have my back and you're looking out for me. And brands that have kind of navigated away from that and towards the points-based, cashback, I think they've really lost something.
I would say a competitor of ours, Nationwide, being up the opposition, they've got progressive deals, so the longer you're with or the more products you have and things like that, which I think is absolutely right. We don't currently offer that, but we are looking at our product range. But I think that's absolutely right that people should recognise loyalty rather than, as I have heard it, and I don't believe this for a minute, that there is a reliance on apathy or inertia, and that banking brands.
This is a low switching category, right?
Don't do enough because they're relying on that inertia, and I think that's a terrible shame. And I think the category, again, if I can challenge it slightly, it seems fixated on acquiring to replace attrition.
Yes.
When you wouldn't have to spend so much on acquiring if you could retain more and develop that loyalty.
That's a brilliant point to go into someone who knows something about telcos who are always losing business because their service is so poorly.
I can't comment on that. So they're all marvellous as far as I'm concerned. I think there is it's a really significant issue actually, and I've come across this as well, because the amount of money spent in marketing to win a new customer is far greater than the amount of effort taken to stop someone churning. Go figure, right? Yeah. It makes absolutely no sense. Now we occasionally step into the world. There are certain moments in a churn event in the telco industry, and it's quite heavily regulated, but there's certain moments where you can actually intervene, and that might be the end of a particular contract period, or it might be reflective of, say, the modem that constantly being rebooted, right? That's one particular business where that person never complained, but you could see in the data that they were just every day, they were just restarting it. So you spot that problem earlier on, communicate with them, and you'll stop that churn event. But if marketing functions focus on new client acquisition and all the cost that brings, which ultimately the customer pays for, it's a terrible, terrible mistake. Do better service all the way through, better communication, because maybe we won't argue about the identical nature of most products you get on the high street these days. And I know there is some variation, but things like broadband and mobile phone, it's all the same. I know one client of ours, ex-client of ours, that a roadside recovery business where churn is categorically related to a breakdown, because a breakdown service is crap. So people don't churn. They don't churn if they don't use the service. Go figure that one.
I mean, I think one thing we have to also know, though, is that people today versus, let's say, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, will shop, right? They will, even if they're planning to renew that home insurance policy, they will go online and shop around and make sure that the deal that they're being offered feels fair. So I think brand marketers have to know that there's going to be shopping behavior. And so it's then, in the context of that, what are you doing to make sure that you still put in front of that customer the best price, the best experience, and give them no reason to leave?
There's an oddity of insurance that existing or renewals tend to be higher than the previous year, but if you present yourself as a new customer elsewhere, it's cheaper, and you go, well,
and
the whole industry is not encouraging loyalty.
And
a
lot of those a lot of insurance companies pay to reacquire the same customer in the same year. So the person goes shopping, they cancel, go shopping, and they come right back to the same brand. And it's a wasteful, but it's also a process that the regulator is looking at right now, because it suggests some sort of unfairness between existing customers and new customers, which can be such a big deal that the regulator is saying, what is going on here?
Isn't that called exploitation?
Yeah, or just taking advantage of the fact of some segment of people will shop, but many segments won't.
The utilities, particularly in the UK, do the same thing. So they work on the basis of the fact that there is a degree of inertia, and therefore they discount the first year and they make it back in the second or third. So this is crazy when you think of loyalty. It should be discounting over the period.
You're training your customer to shop, but you're also training your customer not to trust that they're getting the best price from you. So fundamentally, it's breaking down the bonds of whatever relationship you thought you had. And it's happening so much in some of these commoditized categories where people really don't care where they're getting their power from or which mobile plan they've got.
No, it's all the same flavour when it comes to the wires.
Right. It's a tricky one, but it's also one where we've kind of created that for ourselves by having, big data analytic work prove that is the most profit maximizing way to
It's
operate.
a challenge though, isn't it? In utilities is a business you wouldn't want to start, right? The margins are absolutely appalling, and then competition makes those margins even worse, and therefore you have to cut costs. So your customer service becomes worse, you have more churn, your costs go up. It's kind of nuts, isn't it? Maybe monopoly's a good thing.
Well,
no, I'm not voting for
it. We may have a chance to take a look at that shortly, right?
I think that it might be worth just dwelling on what makes customers stay. When you look at the biggest company, I think in the world is still Apple. I could be wrong.
Market cap wise, probably, yeah.
Cap. And the Apple experience is an extraordinary one. If you go into a retail store, Apple is possibly the most extraordinary piece of retail experience. Mm-hmm. You feel fated, as though you are a god when you walk in, and you have to have sufficient capital.
Your wallet is a god when you walk
exactly.
in. Right?
But the thing that's fascinating to me, and we had this discussion recently, that if you want to leave Apple, if you are an Apple fan person and you use their platforms and their services, it's impossible or pretty difficult to actually leave.
Yeah.
And yet, when we talk about utilities, it's so simple to leave. I wonder if those barriers that prevent people from changing provider are good or bad, both for society and for the profits for the company. I mean, are we happy that the big tech firms make it almost impossible to change providers?
I'm no fan of Apple, never have been, but I appreciate the cult is quite compelling for people. What do I think about this? I think choice, if you are going to go and spiral down to the lowest possible cost, then unless you automate, service is going to get worse. And so but it's self-serving for me to say that, but it's inevitable, as the sun rises, it's just inevitable. You have to automate, otherwise you can't catch up, because people are expensive. And so in a world where competition is fated, and that's not a bad place to be, that's the way capitalism works, companies just are going to have to get more efficient at what they do. The branch structure there's a Dutch bank I work with, they reduced their branch structure from 1,300 to about 100, but what they did in terms of trying to create more carbon to carbon interaction, the human to human, was do more video conference stuff, right? And so you still had the bank manager having the engagement with the human, but you didn't have to do it in a branch. Mm-hmm. And so there's lots of ways you can do this, but ultimately it comes down to a fundamental understanding of your data and improved communication to your customer base in a human-like way. But I am entirely self-serving by saying that. But I'm right.
I think people are being trapped in a brand, and you've talked about Apple. I am going to go back to banking, and we have the CAS, the switching service that automates the whole process for you, and the regulators have pushed this really hard, and yet it didn't seem to make a difference, and switching is down lower than it ever was before. There's the stat that you're more likely to leave your spouse or partner than you are to change your bank account, and yet more than half of the population say they're not entirely happy with their bank account. But
they probably say the same about their spouse. But
exactly, that's true. but the inertia is there, so it's not necessarily that banks have got you trapped in. There is perhaps a perception that something will go wrong and my mortgage payment will fail or something. So people are a little bit afraid of it. But I don't think that there are real barriers there. It's just in consumers' minds. So you could leave Apple, but you choose not to. It's just a little bit easier. I don't think there are real barriers put there. It's just consumer behaviour to, do you know what, it's not so bad, I'll stick with it, which is a danger, for the category and for them as well. I think people should vote with their feet more often. But
I think also I make a kind of mental distinction between media and entertainment and sort of consumption of tech in the Apple sense of it versus my healthcare, my transit, where I live, where I bank, where I think having no choice or feeling trapped or otherwise having no options is kind of worse. I do realize there's a problem if everyone's living in the same news bubble that they're only getting one kind of information. But I think the fact that Apple is so ubiquitous is actually, to me, they're a channel that has, exploded the number of choices people have in terms of what actual media they consume. So it doesn't concern me that much. What concerns me more is big tech brands that don't manage my data thoughtfully, or that take advantage of the data that they have on me to, create other big businesses that could potentially violate my privacy or otherwise compromise my ability to get good health care, whatever it might be. That, to me, that's more of a problem.
So, sorry to interrupt, but how do banks deal with the notion of within the data? I mean, probably the relationship you have with your bank's probably one of your longest. I think 20%, less than that. It's very little churn. I've been with the same bank since I was 18, so about a million years. So vast amounts of data. Yes, I'm far too lazy to change. And they were open on a Saturday, that's why I did it. And anyway, so vast amounts of data, but the stuff within that data that you could use to proactively communicate with people, say it might be, there would be evidence around a promotion, there would be evidence around the birth of a child, there'll be evidence around marriage and joint accounts, there'll be evidence around the beginning or the end of a mortgage period, there'll be evidence around debt events likely to happen. How much does GDPR affect the thinking inside banks of actually it would be useful, it would be nice to just do that? I'll give you one example that doesn't work for me, right? I don't use online banking app. I have a joint account and a very sensible wife. She does that. But my bank sends me a text message every time I go overdrawn, but not overdrawn in a proper way, like 10 quid overdrawn, right? And they send me a message every single time it happens. It's really annoying. It's really, really annoying, right?
Turn
they
it
should
off.
do it.
You
Yeah.
can switch it off.
Well, no, it's a proactive text, and it's from a letter, not a number.
You
I
can
don't
turn
use
that.
Select
and
can
not if
turn
I don't
that
use
off.
the app. Not if I don't use the app.
So your thing
it's just-
about what
but
do
anyway, the
banks?
temptation.
So what you were just describing is life event marketing,
Yeah.
and banks, insurance companies absolutely do all of that.
Trigger-based, yeah.
That's kind of
To personas
bread and
or
butter
individuals?
of what happens
individuals,
inside a bank
based on
marketing
those signals,
department.
yeah.
But
Mostly because I don't use the app.
but you have to do that in a way that's not creepy, right?
Okay.
And that's where I think the GDPR does not prevent that stuff. I think what GDPR does is make you a little bit more thoughtful about what data you're holding and how you're analyzing it and for what purpose.
So you
have
proactively
to-
communicate
I-
with people
I think
around
that there is
future
really
debt
Life
events.
events, yeah.
For future debt events.
You're pregnant. You probably need to pay money to open up
No,
a
I get
nursery in your
that.
house.
I get that. But
And that's
debt
the-
is a more challenging
Sorry,
one.
if we can pull it back a little bit from actually.
You will be getting
Dr.
an
Mark's
offer for a credit card.
upcoming pregnancy notifications. I think that there is a
Blimey,
really,
that would be a surprise.
I think there's a really interesting point about how you shape notifications and how you take the data that any organization may have in order to produce more appropriate offers or propositions. I think that is a really big and important thing as we become more mechanistic in the way we manage data. But will that really improve customer experience, or will it just irritate us? Will we get more notices that don't really help? That's the thing that fascinates me about relationship I have with a provider. I want them to back off many times. I don't want to have any more notifications. I want them to understand my real needs and supply some solution to them. For example, banks are often trying to sell you wellness programs or something to do with health, whereas apparently, according to numbers and statistics, the biggest cause for people's mental unrest is because they haven't got enough money. So
Stress of money. So we don't push healthcare packages, but anyway, I think the important thing to say is that it's not one size fits all. Society can be segmented for all the right reasons to be more relevant, and somebody may want a lot of touch, a lot of communication, a lot of transparency with their financial affairs.
5 times a day
5
overdraft
times a day if you want
update.
it.
Right.
And some people will, no, I don't want it at all, and they can actually switch it off. Or you can interspace with an odd message every someone saying, are these helpful? Do you want more or less? And you can control and manage the amount of notifications, the frequency, and even what time of day. The sophistication is there to do that. And I think we just need to recognise, as not just banks but service brands, that not everyone wants the same amount of notifications all for the same sorts of things.
But increasingly, you're able to curate that yourself, right?
True.
You're able to tell them what you're interested in, when, how many times, with what frequency, and you can kind of create your own dialogue with the provider. And it's the app, that's the digital tools that enable that if you want. But relevance and context are the grail, right? So people are searching for that sort of landing the right message at the right time. That's what we've always been doing. Now the tools are just better.
So we talked a little bit about great exposure to our personal exposure to great customer experience. What was the last time that a customer experience changed your behavior, or did you change a supplier as a direct result of a customer experience?
My son's insurance claim. Changed the insurance company immediately and wrote to the CEO of the relevant company.
So that was based on a bad exposure.
Absolutely appalling experience.
I want to find a good one.
Good experience? Oh no. Only the ones I deliver, obviously.
I think it's so telling that everyone's staring at the ceiling and not, we don't have any experiences.
I would say in the travel space, there are definitely, whether it's hotel brands or airline brands, where that being treated like a best customer at a particular hotel where you stay all the time, I do think that drives both purchase intent, loyalty, frequency, all those things. I think hotels operate in the space where they have the opportunity to win that. But hotels are so much more experiential than what type of bread or butter you're buying. I think there's just a different level of emotional engagement there.
I've got a sommelier that's got it about right, so he hits me at exactly the right moment for the amount of booze and the offers he sends. That works a treat, actually. Yeah, Friday. Bound to run out now.
But I do think there's a point around experience brands versus brands that are giving you something that's just much more functional.
Well, I think what would be really useful is we've talked about a wide range of different future customer experiences. Perhaps if you could just give me a summary as to where you see the future and how it could be better.
We've talked about data. I'll go first. I think there's a lot of. I think the future will be working with the data a lot more, but a lot more predictive, a lot more proactive. They'll be determining things and interacting in a way, because subtlety is everything. I think we talked about not overdoing it, being creepy with the data. But I think the future will be us or being monitored by brands much more closely than we realise, but not in a creepy way, and it's used much more relevantly.
Don't look this phrase up, because I made it up in a pub about a year ago, but human-computer rapport is the thing that's interesting me at the moment, and it's the notion that automated communication can be informed by prior communication. So when you meet someone and you find out they're interested in football, so the next time you talk to them, you might start talking about football. Now, computers can learn in ways that are quite interesting. They don't tend to forget. So it's perfectly possible for a brand to have, if you have, what's the largest customer we've got? About 180 million customers. If you have 180 million customers, it's perfectly possible to have 180 million different conversations. You do not need to go down persona route or type of person or all this kind of stuff. You can do it down to the individual layer. And that data already exists. So if you build on that data, you have to do it very carefully and very subtly, and you must never cross a sort of red-faced line. But you can then learn certain behaviours, best channel, best time of day, best tone of voice, whatever else it may be, best language of choice. And don't make assumptions. We fell into this trap of assuming someone, we do some comms in the States, which is both American English and Spanish. And just because a flag says this person is Spanish, they may actually not like to be communicated in Spanish first. So don't make that assumption. Give them the choice of switching, but don't make any kind of assumptions. If you do that, then you can have the communication. I occasionally call it the communication that makes you smile. It comes in, it's just right. Right time of day, right tone of voice, right message, right content, accurate. And it makes you smile. Brands are not your friends, but they can look out for you and improve the way they communicate.
Do you see that in the age of surveillance capitalism that people will be more reticent about letting you have knowledge of their personal football choices, for example?
It was a trivial example, but I can assure you, one of my own TV providers on a monthly basis asks me to subscribe to football channels when I don't actually ever watch football. So that works the other way. I'm concerned about it. Actually, I think people are far too free with their data. I don't think they realise what they're doing.
Yeah.
I think the T's and C's, the 30-page T's and C's, is scandalous. I think you should be able to explain what you're going to do with stuff in a paragraph. And I think we see it all the time, and it worries the hell out of me. I don't use social media, and there's a reason for that. I have in the past. I understand what people do with that information. I don't do it myself.
Yeah.
I'm not even that interested in location-based data either.
But I think there's lots of evidence that, you know, across broad segments of the population, sharing behavior is getting greater, not less.
We should protect them from that.
But I also think that people are much more educated about where and how things are sharing. It's changing over time. If you do, you know, research among 25-year-olds, they're significantly more cognizant of where their data is than somebody 20 years older.
You knew what I was doing when I was 25.
Yeah, but I think what's also going to be important, and we've talked a lot about how you can, you know, brands are using data to do a better job for me. I think what consumers are increasingly going to care about is, I want the brand to do something good for me, but I also want the brand to be doing good for someone else too. So the whole idea of, you know, purpose-led brands and brands that not just, you know, serve me well, but serve the wider community well and serve the wider, you know, the world well. I think that's going to be a place where brands begin to differentiate, because after they've personalized and communicated with me and prompted me and done all the stuff that I want, I think consumers increasingly are saying, okay, yeah, but go clean up the oceans, right? And I'm not, you know, giving kind of an extreme example, but I think that is what consumers start to care about.
Really good example. And the power company I use is the one that everything it's from sustainable resources. It's from wind, it's from wave, and they plant trees, and that's why I use them. And they're still a marginal business, but I use them because they're doing some good with that, and there's very few that do.
Well, you know, what can I say? Thank you so much to all of you for your fantastic contributions, and I think we leave on a good, purposeful, sustainable and positive note. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.